Ok, siccome la platea è in gran parte costituita da italiani, io parlo italiano, al professor Milanovic do una traccia in inglese di quello che io dirò. This is in English, more or less what I will say. Okay. Fatemi introdurre con grande onore il professor Milanovic qui al grattacielo di Intesa Sanpaolo, perché oggi terrà una lezione magistrale sulle disuguaglianze globali e lo fa all'interno della programmazione di Biennale Democrazia 2019. Per chi non conoscesse già il professor Milanovic, mi limito a dire che Angus Deaton, che è il premio Nobel dell'economia del 2015, lo considera il pensatore più profondo e audace tra gli studiosi della disuguaglianza. Milanovic ha un'esperienza maturata alla Banca Mondiale, dove è stato lead economist e dove ha prodotto questo famoso grafico dell'elefante di cui parleremo fra un po'. Tra le varie affiliazioni dal punto di vista accademico io ricordo solo quella del Graduate Center della City University of New York, la Maryland University e Johns Hopkins University. Scendendo le scale mi ha detto che in questo momento si trova a Barcellona alla Graduate Institute di Pompeo Fabra. Ritorniamo un attimo al grafico, io ve ne parlerò brevemente, poi il professore entrerà nel dettaglio. Con questo grafico dell'elefante, si chiama così perché ha la forma dell'elefante, Milanovic dimostra che fra il 1988 e il 2008 il costo della globalizzazione l'hanno pagato fondamentalmente due ceti sociali, i poverissimi e la classe media. Ne hanno invece beneficiato in maniera significativa i ricchi, in maniera molto più modesta i poveri non poverissimi che hanno un po' migliorato le loro condizioni. Questo fenomeno ovviamente è un fenomeno che dà spunto e fornisce una spiegazione di quello che è il crescente disagio della classe media nei paesi occidentali, sia perché da un lato percepisce come minaccia l'arrivo dei ceti emergenti dei paesi in via di sviluppo, sia perché dall'altra parte c'è ovviamente un modo anche sdegnato di guardare all'arricchimento senza giustificazione di quell'1% della popolazione che era già ricco. Ora, se allargassimo l'orizzonte temporale al 2016, il grafico originale arrivava fino al 2008, il quadro non cambierebbe, anzi le disparità fra poveri e ricchi sarebbero ancora più forti. Se guardiamo questo grafico al 2016, forse il professore ce lo farà vedere, vedremo che l'1% della popolazione ha un aumento del reddito che può essere approssimato da una curva iperbolica, quindi in maniera molto consistente. Se poi allarghiamo il quadro e passiamo dal reddito al patrimonio, la situazione è ancora più allarmante. C'è un recente report che si chiama Global Wealth Report che mostra che 3,2 miliardi di adulti, cioè il 64% degli adulti a livello mondiale, possiede solo l'1,9% della ricchezza privata mondiale. Questo a confronto con 42 milioni, non miliardi, milioni di adulti, cioè l'1% della popolazione adulta che possiede oltre il 45% della ricchezza globale. Quindi capiamo che la disparità è tanto dal punto di vista dei redditi quanto dal punto di vista della ricchezza. Se guardiamo all'Italia, visto che siamo qua, non sfuggiamo a questo trend. Anzi, dal punto di vista della concentrazione dei ricchissimi nelle classifiche mondiali, ci posizioniamo settimi, dopo gli Stati Uniti, dopo la Cina, dopo la Germania, il Regno Unito, il Giappone e l'India, ci siamo noi. E in effetti sappiamo bene, perché viviamo in questo paese, che le disparità sono aumentate a partire dalla crisi. C'è un dato Eurostat molto interessante che dice che con la crisi economica il 10% della popolazione più povera ha perso in termini di potere di acquisto il 30%. Quindi siamo esattamente nella situazione in cui si trovano altri paesi. Inoltre nel nostro paese abbiamo una specificità che forse caratterizza più noi che altri, che è il fatto che spesso i patrimoni passano di generazione in generazione. E qui voglio solo fare una piccola menzione a un working paper della Banca d'Italia del 2016 che è estremamente interessante perché mostra la fotografia della distribuzione della ricchezza a Firenze in 25 generazioni, cioè confronta Firenze nel periodo del Rinascimento e Firenze del 2011. Ebbene, sorprendentemente le famiglie ricche del 1427, i 5 cognomi ricchi del 1427 sono gli stessi cognomi del 2011. E non pensate che siano nobili, no? Uno può pensare, vabbè, sono nobili, si passano nel castello del padre e figlio e via, no? Non è questo, sono in realtà famiglie che appartengono alle corporazioni della lana, alle corporazioni della pelle, quindi è un quadro un po' estremo quello di Firenze, probabilmente non si applica a tutte le città, ma quello che possiamo dire è che in quel caso c'è stata una immobilità intergenerazionale paurosa accompagnata da una disuguaglianza di opportunità. Ed è sempre vero che questa disparità economica significa anche avere un diverso accesso alle risorse e anche una diversa possibilità di investire in capitale umano attraverso soprattutto l'istruzione. Se guardassimo, diciamo così, se le cose stanno così, c'è un rapporto che si chiama Wealth Inequality Report che dice che la situazione continuerebbe a ampliare questo gap nei prossimi 30 anni e quindi è evidente che c'è la necessità di pensare a politiche innovative dal punto di vista fiscale, dal punto di vista della lotta all'evasione, dal punto di vista degli investimenti pubblici, ma anche dal punto di vista del riuscire a portare la gente di nuovo a percepire il valore dell'istruzione. E su questo mi voglio fermare perché penso che l'istruzione, cioè riuscire a mantenere i ragazzi all'interno del sistema scolastico e riuscire anche a capire come formare i nuovi lavoratori siano elementi che possono in qualche maniera agire dal basso, cioè possono aiutare le persone meno abbienti a recuperare una parte del gap. L'istruzione fa la differenza, e questo è il mio punto, perché non lo dico io, lo dicono i dati. Ci sono 2 rapporti dell'UNESCO e della International Education Commission che dicono che l'istruzione riduce la disuguaglianza. E perché? Perché aumenta la crescita. Per esempio è provato che ogni anno addizionale di studio in un paese povero produce a livello di reddito pro capite il 10% in più. Se ricchi e poveri avessero lo stesso accesso all'istruzione, il gap a livello di carriera si ridurrebbe del 39%. È ancora più, diciamo così, eclatante il fatto che se tutti i bambini avessero accesso all'istruzione, il PIL pro capite dei paesi in via di sviluppo aumenterebbe del 70%. Quindi cosa voglio dire? Che probabilmente, con ogni probabilità, quello che i dati ci dicono è che se si studia, se c'è un accesso all'istruzione, questo aumenta la crescita, riduce la povertà e in parte anche le disuguaglianze. Non basta questo, ma in parte le disuguaglianze. Quindi io direi che accanto diciamo, all'intervento pubblico che deve garantire l'accesso universale all'istruzione, non dobbiamo dimenticarci che bisogna sensibilizzare le persone sul valore dell'istruzione, sul valore della formazione. Quindi spendere energie, tempo, denaro nella formazione deve essere considerato un valore per la collettività, sia attraverso quella che è in qualche maniera la pressione sociale, sia attraverso la valorizzazione dei livelli di studio all'interno dei contesti lavorativi. Qui faccio un piccolissimo riferimento all'Italia, che voglio dire, in cui si trovano la percentuale di laureati più bassa in Europa. Solo il 4% della popolazione adulta ha un titolo di studio superiore al diploma e noi trattiamo i laureati all'interno del mondo dei lavori in una maniera pessima. La maggior parte dei laureati cerca di andare all'estero. Questa è una cosa gravissima. Quindi diciamo che accanto alle politiche che comunque sono necessarie bisogna anche prendere in considerazione che c'è bisogno di una responsabilizzazione individuale, e qui mi riferisco anche per esempio ai genitori che vivono in condizioni socio-economiche difficili. Bisogna sostenere l'impegno e lo sforzo delle proprie figlie e dei propri figli a rimanere a scuola. L'istruzione può fare la differenza. E l'istruzione non è una perdita di tempo, come alcuni in questi anni e in questi giorni continuano a dirci. Non si perde tempo istruendosi. Quindi dovrebbe tornare a essere un valore universale e condiviso, perché questo, almeno dal lato dei meno abbienti, potrebbe aiutare a chiudere in parte il gap, che ha bisogno anche di altro per essere chiusi. Allora io, come voi, sono molto, mi fermo perché sono molto ansiosa di sentire il professor Milanovic, che avrà sicuramente, ci darà sicuramente spunti di discussione. Alla fine raccoglieremo qualche domanda e quindi lascio il palco a lui e gli farei intanto un applauso di benvenuto.
Grazie. Well, thank you very much, Professor Paladino. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I think I will actually stand up now because I think it's easier for me to present it. Is the sound okay? Because it's very difficult to tell if the sound is good or not here. So I would speak, as Giovanna said, actually, and as you know in your schedule, I would speak about global inequality. Global inequality of income. So I would actually have to start really from quite afar because I really would like to bring all these issues that were mentioned, including the, quite famous now, the elephant chart and all of that. I would like to bring it in a context in which it was worked and designed. So let me start then first by saying that what I will speak today is based on the previous book, actually, my latest book, Global Inequality, translated in Italian. It's by Louis Publishers in Rome, and it's called Ingiustizia Globale in Italian. Well, they changed a little bit the title, as you can see. The next one is called Capitalism Alone. I will explain in a minute why this may be unusual title, and I think it will be. It is already the Italian rights have been bought by La Terza, so I hope in Italian it will be. In English it will be this summer. It will be out in Italian probably next spring. So. The structure of the talk, and I would speak for about 30 minutes, and then I would be told to wrap up because I would like really to have the opportunity to actually have questions and answers. So the structure of the talk, first I would like to say a few words about the uniqueness of the current period. That's actually the topic of my next book. First of all, we tend to forget these things or not really to pay too much attention. What is very special in today's period is the first time in history, I think, that capitalism is the only mode of production around the world. The book talks quite a lot about China, so I'm not going now to talk about China to convince you that China is a capitalist country, but by all empirical or objective definitions, if you look that most of the production in China is carried in the private sector, that 80% of employment in China is in the private sector, and it's decentralized coordination, China too is a capitalist country. Now, people forget about the uniqueness of that, but they, of course, should think that, of course, there was a period when communism was a serious challenger to capitalism. And even if you go before World War I, you had serfdom and slavery, which were very common. I mean, just to give you some examples, in the U.S., as you know, slavery existed until 1865. In Russia, serfdom existed until 1861. In Brazil, slavery existed until 1884. So all the way to the end of the 19th century, we had really large parts of the world where you had peasants or farmers really physically tied to land. And then we had the World War I and the communist challenge to capitalism. So now, for the first time in history, capitalism is alone. So that's the title of the book. It has no challenger. On the other hand, the second part is that capitalism now comes in two different forms. One form is the one that, of course, we are familiar with. It's liberal, or you can call it meritocratic capitalism. And the other form is the political capitalism of China. And that emergence of an alternative type of capitalism has many political implications. But it has also an economic implication that I would talk about today in global inequality, is that you have the reemergence of Asia as an economic power, and not only the emergence of Asia, but also the equalization of incomes between the West European part of the Eurasian continent and the Pacific part of Asia. And actually it is kind of nice to be in Italy to kind of remind people that, for example, when Marco Polo went to China, the level of income in Venice or Florence, actually he came from Venice, but in Italian city-states, and the cities that he visited in China was approximately equal. Actually, it could be that China even at that time had a higher level of income. But what we have been used to in the last 2 centuries is this uncontested dominance in terms of income of the West. But that was, as I will now show you in a minute, it was a very kind of relatively short period of time. And that short period of time is now coming to an end. So this is the second important feature of today's world. And you will see that in a minute it has all implications for how global inequality is working out, and it has implications as to what happened to the middle classes in the rich world. And let me just put this point very, very clearly, because I think it's sometimes not fully understood. We have, if we are interested in sort of more scientific explanation of the Western malaise today, to think of this not only in the terms of what happened since the financial crisis or what happened since the introduction of the euro. We have to see that really in what, the French annals school called la longue durée. We have to see the decline of the Western middle class as a longer-term process of rebalancing economic power between Asia and the West. So I would talk about the emergence of the global middle class. I would talk about the somewhat paradoxical situation that we have now for the first time again in history, something which looks like a global middle class, and we have at the same time shrinkage of the middle classes in the rich countries. And then I would say, if we have the time, I would speak about the last 25 years in the rich world, and I don't think that we'll have the time to talk about more political and philosophical issues, but I'm sure that some of them would come up during the questions and answers. So let me start with the long run. This is the slide, the graph, that shows you on a horizontal axis, as you can see easily, these are the years. And on the vertical axis is the Gini coefficient, named after Corrado Gini, another Italian. By the way, Italians were very active, many of them very active, for example, Pareto, in the studies of income distribution. Einaudi also, they're talking about people in the past, but of course there are many others in the present who work on inequality in Italy. So the Gini coefficient is a coefficient that goes from 0 when theoretically everybody has the same income to 100 when theoretically one person or one household has the entire income of that place. Now, this is the global Gini coefficient. I'm not going to explain how it was calculated because it's really based on lots of assumptions in the past. More recently, it is being calculated using household surveys, fiscal data, and so forth. But let's skip the calculation part, and also let me just mention that the coefficient adjusts for differences in price levels between different countries. So, what you notice here, that at the time of the Industrial Revolution, the Gini coefficient was high at 55, which of course is a fairly high number. In Italy today, the Gini coefficient is about 35 approximately. So the world was an unequal place. But notice then how over the entire 19th century and even the first part of the 20th century, global inequality went up. So that's a very important thing to realize. Global inequality went up. Why did global inequality go up? It went up for 2 reasons. First, the Western countries became richer, and India and China, and the 2 of them really include now, like then and now, more than the half of the world population. India and China remained equally poor or became poorer. So that created a huge divergence in incomes. That divergence of incomes pushed global inequality up. On top of that, inequality in the rich countries became higher. Think of inequality increase during the Industrial Revolution in England and later in the US. And we had actually, by the way, Italian data which go back all the 1860. It was the work recently done by Giovanni Vecchi and Andrea Brandolini. So it's a very nice book of Italian inequality going back to the unification. So you have the global inequality going up throughout 19th century, and early 20th century, reaching a very, very high plateau of the Gini of 70 points, which is actually higher than inequality, let's suppose, in South Africa. So extremely high level of inequality. Then remaining on that plateau until the end of the 20th century, sometime like 20, 25 years ago, and then going down. Now, why is this going down, as the graph says? Because of the rise of Asia. So what is the rise of Asia when translated in global inequality? It is the beginning of the convergence of Asian incomes with a population whose income was much lower than in the rich world, so they are now converging. If you have a convergence, then obviously you're going to have a reduction of inequality. The only sort of a thing which kind of offsets that decrease of inequality is, first, that the top 1% globally is becoming richer, and secondly, that inequality within individual countries, US, China, India, Italy, Germany, Russia, is going up. So now to summarize, in the current period, if you compare it with the Industrial Revolution, we have the rise of Asia, whereas in the Industrial Revolution, that was the rise of the West. In the Industrial Revolution, we had a divergence of country incomes that pushed global inequality up. Currently, we have convergence of country incomes that push global inequality down. And in the period after the Industrial Revolution, we had rising inequalities within nation states, and that's exactly also what we have now, rising inequality within nation states. So we have almost a mirror image of what happened 2 centuries ago. So that's why I think in that context we have to look at globalization and what happens to the global distribution of income. In some ways, we are actually living a period which is undoing the effects of the 19th century industrial revolution and distribution of incomes that actually became possible as a result of that. A different way actually to look at that is also to divide global inequality into 2 components. One component is due to the differences, this is now in red color, to the differences in average incomes between the countries. Now, that component is very easy to understand. It is assumed, this is based on the assumption that, let's suppose, every Italian had the mean income of Italy, every French person had the mean income of France, and so on. But that component, if it's large, I call it location, means that people who live in poor countries have a huge incentive to come to rich countries because their income would increase 5 or 10 times. And then when you look at issues of migration that are, of course, very present in Italy, these issues of migration stem from the very big location component in global inequality. The big location component in global inequality simply means that if you're in a poor country, as I said before, by migrating to Italy or to Spain or to France or to Germany, you can multiply your income many times. If we had a world which was different, if we had a world where the mean incomes were very similar, so the location component was very small, then there will be no systematic pressure to migrate. Because, of course, some people would still migrate because they like maybe Italian food or like the Italian weather, but there is no systematic pressure because systematic pressure comes only or predominantly from the differences in income. And as you notice, that location component today is extremely high. And as long as that location component remains high, migration pressure in the world would be high, especially at the time of globalization where we know the differences in income. Maybe if you were to go in the 18th century, you would not know the difference in income between the rich and poor parts of the world. Moreover, as I just was saying before, when we talked about the income levels in Western Europe and in China in 13th and 14th century, people had no idea about what are the income level in China, nor did the Chinese have any idea what was the income level in Italy. But of course nowadays everybody knows what are the income levels in different countries. The second component is inequality within nation states. That's the gray component, which I call class. Now, class simply means that if, essentially we look at the contribution of inequalities within Italy, within the US, within Russia, within China, to global inequality. What has happened in the latter part of the 20th century was that location component became very large, and the class component, because there was a period of a large declines of inequality after World War II, the class component, the gray component, shrank. What is the world of the 21st century? That's very kind of interesting to start thinking about this. First, rising inequalities within nation states are bringing back the class component. So the main cleavage, and why I put Marx, because if you look at the mid-19th century, class was a very significant contributor to total inequality. So the class cleavage within nation states was very large. Then it became relatively small for the reasons that I just explained. But now we are moving in the 21st century toward a situation where cleavage, again, national cleavage, again becomes a strong component. So that's why I put then return to Karl Marx. On the other hand, the location component is still very large. It would be reduced, and it is reduced like every year by growth of China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on. But the lack of convergence in Africa means that that component is going to be very high. So I think we have to realize that in the 21st century, we would be facing two really huge pressures coming from the global inequality. One is the pressure of lack of convergence, mostly in Africa, which will be the migration pressure, which, as I say, for Europe is a question of the next 100 years. So it is not a question that would go next summer or the summer after that. That's actually a long-term issue. And the second problem would rising inequalities within nation states, which would increase the class cleavage. Whether it would not be now the class cleavage as in the past, bourgeoisie workers, it would be a different cleavage. It could be the cleavage maybe between the young and the old. It would be the cleavage maybe between rural populations and urban populations. It would be the cleavage between those who have done well and are educated and know languages and so on, and those who are left behind. But that cleavage will become much stronger than it was in the 20th century. So this is how we have to think, I believe, of the 21st century issue, and to see that it's a long-term issue that is not, I think, going to go away in a couple of years. Just a simple illustration, I will go quickly over that, just to show you the resurgent Asia. This is the ratio of income of China, India, and Indonesia with respect to the corresponding European countries. And of course, you see that like in every graph, you would see, of course, Asia regaining its position which it kind of had before the Industrial Revolution. And actually, if you do some projections for China, by I think 2032 or 2034, Chinese mean incomes would reach the level of median income in the European Union. So, simply when you grow even at 6% per year and the European Union grows at 0.5% a year, you're actually every year catching up in a significant way. Different way to see this is when you look at the Chinese incomes and the American incomes. As you see on that graph, the American incomes are on the right. Obviously, they are much higher. But as you can notice, Chinese incomes are gradually moving towards the part of the income distribution that used to be taken by the United States. Let me just finally end this part, and I'll go now into the more recent developments, with one observation which I think goes very well to understand the problems of the world, goes very well when I talk to people in Europe. It is, think of the difference in difficulty in migration, solving political issues and others, when you move from a EU 6 or EU 15, which are the countries which had very similar levels of income, to a situation when you have EU 28, where essentially many of the issues that the EU faces today is the product of unequal level of income. Even if you can argue, and I will not go into the discussion of Brexit, but you can even argue that the very Brexit is the result of uneven level of income in Europe because of large migration of East Europeans to England and then sort of dissatisfaction of some parts of the British population by that migration. So the world is the European Union, but in a much more dramatic way because the gaps in income are much higher. So in other words, if we had globalization taking place with countries being on a similar level of income, the issues that we face today would be entirely different from the issues that we face now. So now this is something that I've said, so I will just skip that. Let me go in the past 25 years in the world, and mostly in the rich world. First of all, one has to realize, as now you know, because we looked at the past, that what we are witnessing now is the greatest reshuffle, and it's actually an interesting term, which I'm not sure even how to translate in Italian, a changing of positions in the world. What I want to say is the following. Let's suppose that you have 100 cards, like in a deck of cards. You give me your income. And I take your income and say I transform that in what is called international dollars, which give you the same purchasing power everywhere. And I say, okay, your income of so many euros puts you at, let's suppose, 82nd percentile of the world income distribution. So you are richer than 82% of people, you're poorer than 18%. And in the past and still now, the top of the income distribution of the world, the top 20 to 25%, were essentially Europeans with some addition, obviously, from Japan, more recently South Korea, Singapore, and so on. What is now changing is that you have a major inflow through global middle class and on these positions of people from Asia. So now, if the middle Chinese person with middle Chinese income in urban areas used to be in 25 or 30 years ago at something like the 40th percentile in the world, he or she now is at the 85th percentile in the world. So what then happens, even if there is real growth, for example in Italy, the relative income position of European population is going to shift down. And so now you would actually have, towards the latter part of the 21st century, the situation that European countries will be composed of people who are at the median level of income in the world, people who are at the 85th percentile, and people who are at the top 1%. In some sense, European distributions would start to resemble Latin American distributions, even if they will be less unequal. But the position of people in the Italian distribution would be actually quite uneven because of the very large inflow of the Asian populations with higher income. And I think it is very clear even in Italy when you go around, you see, of course, many more Chinese, Indian tourists, you see many more people buying real estate in Italy and so on. And this is all process of the same, part of the same development. These are the watershed years. I will not go into all of that. You can read them. Because the big change really started at the late 70s, early 1980s. And I think many people sometimes in Europe forget that the maybe most tremendous change was the change of policies in China with Deng Xiaoping in 1978. But as you can see down this list, you realize that in about 10 years, really about 10 years, you had populations of India, China, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, and the United States beginning to live under a different economic system. So it was an absolutely dramatic policy change, and the effects of this policy change are now quite visible 40 years later. So how does the global income distribution look like? This is like how distributions look like. They are asymmetric, which means that you have quite a lot of people at the right end, because that's where the rich people are. But to give you an idea, in US dollars of the equal purchasing power parity, you have people, 10% of the population of the world is really below something which basically is subsistence level. So people below $2 a day approximately. Then you have the median of the world, which is, as you can see here, $2,100 per year. So that, gives you something like less than $200 per capita per month. Now, this per capita includes also children. So this is not the wage. So it's actually total income of a family divided by number of family members. Then here is the mean income. The first one was the median, meaning that 50% of population is below 50 above. Then you have the median, which is, as you can see here, 5,500. So you were talking here about maybe approximately $500 per month per individual, again, including children. But the important part, which I think is very important for Western countries, is the median income of the West European, North American, and Oceania is, as you can see here, much higher. And the median income is at the 95th percentile. So that's what I was saying before. We are still in the situation where the Western world, essentially, these are the poorest people in the Western world. I take the American bottom decile. So essentially, the Western world is all located in the top 25% of the population of the world. But that is actually going to change, and I think it's already changing. And this is what I was calling the most significant reshuffle or change of positions over the last 2 centuries. The reemergence of the global middle class is quite clear on this graph, where I actually looked at global distribution in 1988 and 2011. So what you notice here is that in the middle of the distribution, you have many more people. And this is this global middle class. Now, a very interesting issue there, I think even for political scientists, is the following one. We have the rise of the global middle class, and at the same time, and maybe partly because we have the rise of the global middle class, which means the rise of the middle class in China, Vietnam, Burma, and elsewhere, we have the shrinkage of the middle classes in the rich world because they may be affected by globalization, outsourcing, import competition, and other things coming from globalization. So we have, on the one hand, the existence of a beginning of the existence of a global middle class whose political role is totally unclear because there is no global governance. So we have global middle class without state, without governance, without any sort of a framework, political framework. On the other hand, we have shrinkage of the national middle classes, which undermine democratic framework in those countries. So again, this is kind of a new situation which we didn't face in the past, because in the past, the global middle class was small and nobody thought of this. But nowadays, with globalization, it is rising, and it's something which in principle should be good news. But what is not good news, that the rise of that middle class is connected with the decline of the European or American middle classes, and that puts the strain on democracy in those countries. I'm probably now at the end.
You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. So I would use these 5 minutes just to show you 2, I think, important slides. One is one that many of you know. This is so-called elephant chart. It looks a little bit like an elephant. I don't know who actually drew that, the original elephant, but it was a very smart guy. But the elephant chart, why did it attract so much attention? Is because what it represents is on the horizontal axis, it puts people at their positions in global income distribution. From the 1, which is the lowest, like the poorest people in the world, to 100, the richest people in the world. And then on the vertical axis, you ask the question, how much have incomes at that particular position gone up in real terms, in percentage terms, in this case 20 years, and I'll show you another one with 25 years. And what you notice is, of course, as Giovanna said first, that actually people who are very poor did not really increase their incomes. And this is not something, I will not go into that, but it's not something striking. De facto, the very poorest people who live at the subsistence they're not the same people, but that group of people who live at subsistence really live at a level of income which existed like 300 or 400 or 500 years ago, because that was the subsistence then and subsistence now. Their numbers are now smaller, or percentages smaller, but they are not actually, that particular group is not improving. But what is, of course, improving was what I call, for simplicity, China middle class, and I'm not going to explain that because it was clear from what I was speaking before who they are. But why the graph attracted so much attention is because you have a very clear absence of growth among people who are richer than the Asian middle class, but who didn't grow. And if you break who are people in that particular position that had almost zero growth, you find 70% of people there to be from the old OECD countries, which means Europe, North America, and Japan, and 3 countries in particular, United States, Germany, and Japan, which had very little growth in the bottom part of their income distribution. And then finally, you'll find, of course, people at the very top 1% with large gains, which now I think seem to be even larger than in my original graph. So the graph, I think, illustrates, as you can already tell, of course, illustrates what we all knew is the rise of China, the middle class there, and also the rise of plutocracy in the West and in the world. But it also illustrates the policy choice that today exists in front of the politicians in the West. And the policy choice, to be very blunt, is twofold. Either you try to go against the rise of China, to redo the rules of globalization, to go into trade war like Trump is doing, in which case all your policies are directed towards reducing that peak there in order to, you hope, improve the position of your middle class. Or the other policy, which very few people or nobody has followed, is to actually try to redistribute internally between the top 1% and domestic middle class. So this is, I think, basically the choice that you face. And I will not go now, and I think there will be questions on that, but I think the graph illustrates very clearly that this is essentially the political choice that the rich countries face today. Now, the graph looks the same, or actually more dramatic even, for the rise of middle classes in China and elsewhere that continued to 2011. I have now the graph 2013, but the basic story doesn't change. Finally, let me just show the last graph, because I think this is the last one, because I think it's a nice graph to show you the positions of different individuals and people in global income distribution. So what this graph does, it takes, as I was saying before, takes on the horizontal axis your position in your national income distribution and asks the question. Let's suppose I know, as I said before, I know that you're at the 82nd percentile in Italy. And then I say, okay, at what percentile in the world do you think you are? Well, since you know that Italy is a rich country, you should really answer, I have to be at a higher position than 82. So I have to be at 85 or 93 or something, because Italy by itself is rich. So if I'm at 82 in Italy, I have to be higher than that in the world. And that's what actually you see in a graph like that, where I start with the United States. You see the very poor people in the US, their bottom percentile, are a little bit above the 50th percentile of the world. And then, of course, as you go higher, you become, of course, part of the higher and higher global percentile. And 12% of Americans are part of the global top 1%. For Italy, this graph would look more or less the same, except for the bottom in Italy. It would be higher than the bottom in the US, but the top in Italy would be lower. So whereas in the US, you have 12% of Americans who are global top 1%, in Italy, that would be 4 to 5% who are global top 1%. But what it illustrates is the very sort of poor position in some sense of India, which you see actually poor people in India are also poor people in the world. You see, however, that people in India who are at the top are now approaching the global top 1%. And this is a little bit unfair graph to India because in 1% of people in India, you have 13 million people. So if I were to break that percent into smaller units, there will be certainly Indians who are part of the global top 1%. But what I really want to bring up is this slide, which is urban China. So what you notice on this slide is that the urban China, the person with the median income in urban China, is already above the world median income, and the people who are at the very top of the income distribution of China are now part of the global top 10%. So this is this really dramatic change which has happened in the last 40 years, which is really a long time. However, rural China, which is the other group here, is a different world. As you can see, it is somewhere, between India and urban China. So urban China is becoming part of the rich world, whereas rural China is staying far behind, and that, of course, is one of the reasons of high inequalities in China. And I finished my talk and my slides with sort of a country which is interesting. You can look at this country and say that country has some extremely poor people who are among the poorest people in the world. It has a middle class because you notice there are quite a few of them who are the 60th, 70th, 80th percentile in the world. It has top 1%, so the country has to be extremely unequal, and this is Brazil that in some sense actually mimics the income distribution of the world. So let me stop because I already spoke, I think, too long. There are obviously many more issues to talk. Factual issues, historical issues, and policy that I didn't have a chance to talk. And I was saying before, I come to the policy at the end. I would be very happy to answer the questions. But I think in order to kind of understand my policy recommendations, one has to understand the logic of arguments which I was trying to present here, because if I were to present you just policy, then you could say, well, everybody can present policies. You don't need to be very clever. You can just make up any story you want. But really, in order to have policies follow up on some empirical and factual things, I think it's a different story. So thank you very much again, and we'll start now with Q&A. Thank you.
Allora, non so se c'è un microfono a disposizione, quindi se ci sono domande, io vedo una domanda lassù, c'è un signore con una giacchetta chiara, in fondo sono attivi, quindi gli stimoli sono tanti. Non so se c'è anche, arrivo anche da lei, non so se c'è anche un traduttore per il... non ce l'ha qui? Qualcuno può prendere un traduttore per il professor Milanovic, così sente la traduzione della domanda?
I can understand and you can help me also.
Ok, that's perfect. Ok.
Posso?
Sì.
Innanzitutto buongiorno. Senta, mi viene da dire una frase che uno spettro si aggira per l'Europa di nuovo, anzi forse per il mondo, nel senso che quello che lei ha illustrato è una cosa che, come lei ha detto, ha 200 anni, e 200 anni nella storia sono proprio pochi. Quando lei ha fatto vedere nei suoi diagrammi che c'è stato un aumento di reddito, e sono nella prima metà del Novecento, nella seconda metà del Novecento segue 2 guerre mondiali della prima metà del Novecento. Per dirla con quel personaggio dalla folta barba, nato Treviri, morto e sepolto a Londra, questo è un processo di accumulazione che avviene insito nel sistema, un'accumulazione di reddito, non di reddito, di capitale, un'accumulazione di forza lavoro, cioè di disoccupati, e un'accumulazione di merci. Si risolve attraverso la guerra, perché a meno che qualcuno pensi che le guerre siano un fattore, come dire, quasi dovuto al clima, ma non è così, lei me lo insegna. Per cui il discorso è, tutto questo sistema che noi abbiamo, la domanda precisa è, e aggiungiamo 3 elementi del XXI secolo, che sono l'aumento della temperatura del clima, che non è solo una questione di acqua che aumentano probabilmente gli oceani, ma è anche il discorso del permafrost che si può sciogliere, no, in Siberia liberando metano. Quindi c'è un problema climatico. C'è un altro problema fondamentale che è l'aumento della popolazione. Che l'aumento della popolazione si parla di arrivare a 10 miliardi entro il 2050 e il 2060, quindi il problema demografico. Se a quel problema aumentiamo ancora, aggiungiamo anche il problema tecnologico che libera continuamente altre forze lavoro, lei capisce che siamo praticamente alla fine del pianeta, o comunque alla fine di un sistema che è durato 300 anni, che non sono molti. Pensi che l'impero romano è durato 11 secoli e secondo me ci sono analogie tra la fine dell'impero romano e la fine dell'Occidente. Comunque ho finito. La domanda precisa è... La domanda precisa è, a questo punto, finirà prima il capitalismo o finirà prima il genere umano? O non è meglio forse che finisca prima il capitalismo del genere umano? Grazie.
Il microfono,
But I still
grazie.
need
Sì. Qualcuno prende anche il traduttore per il professor Milanovic, chiedo alla hostess, grazie. Allora, ha capito? Did you understand more?
I understood more or less, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer to this question?
Yeah, I may not have understood everything about the 19th century, although I got it about the accumulation of capital. Yes, and unemployment and so on. But I think that the last question was, if I understood correctly, the last question was two big sort of negative things coming and going now is the climate change and the increase of population, and with a peak of maybe 11 to 12 billion people. First, I have to say that I deal here with global distribution of income. I cannot deal with other issues. I cannot deal with the issue of shortage of water. I cannot deal with climate change. I think climate change is related to income distribution. This is a different topic. As you know, probably most of the emissions come from the rich people. So when we talk about China being great emitter, that's true. But the real emitters are really us. It's really the rich people in China or Italy, United States, and elsewhere, because, as you know, the largest contributors to emissions are meat consumption, transportation, air conditioning, heating, all the things, cars, all the things essentially that rich people do. So there is an income distribution sort of side to climate change. The next point is increased population and so on. Now, and the final question that you asked, is this the end of capitalism or the end of the humankind? I'm not so pessimistic. I don't think it will be the end of the humankind, but we don't know, but I think that this slightly alarmist talk that sees the end of humankind is just, I think, at odds with reality. Actually, the humankind, in some sense, have never lived as well as now and has technological abilities to solve many problems. I think the real danger, but this is really, we are going now in a different direction. I think the real danger is, in my opinion, of a nuclear war. So I think that seems to me a greater danger than a process that ultimately I believe we will be able technologically to control, which is the climate change. But anyway, this is, obviously different people have different views, but it is not something that is dealt in my book to any length, except for this issue of a link between high global inequality and high emissions by the rich people.
Allora, intanto che diamo la possibilità al professor Milanovic di avere il traduttore, c'era un'altra domanda lassù e l'ho vista, sì, l'ho visto anche di qua, non si preoccupi. Intanto finiamo lassù, la signora aveva alzato la mano tra i primi, quindi... Okay. E poi arrivo qua.
Buongiorno a tutti, mi riaggancio un attimo al discorso del signore di prima, cioè sembra che in questo discorso completo non è stato affrontato proprio la popolazione, cioè noi in Italia siamo a crescita zero, quindi siamo un paese anziano se non vecchio e stiamo inglobando una situazione emergente ed in emergenza, perché non siamo organizzati né preparati neanche culturalmente a inglobare milioni di persone e con milioni di civiltà diverse, usanze diverse, a volte che ci danno ricchezza, ma a volte che ci danno situazioni in genere pericolose da un punto di vista sociosanitario ed economico, che il Paese è stato anche abbandonato poi da quello che è il complesso europeo in generale. Non mi intendo di economia, su tutt'altro campo, in quello sanitario, e le forze sono veramente basse da tutti i punti di vista. Ecco, però il gancio era quello, la popolazione. Io se sono un governo non posso pensare come la Cina, a mantenere una classe alta in una popolazione di miliardi di persone. Lo vediamo noi che siamo circa 60 milioni di abitanti, poco più. E quindi chiaramente come fai a distribuire la ricchezza se tu a maggior ragione la distribuisci a poche culture, a poche unità? Sì, il gancio importante è la cultura, lo studio, ma se io posso studiare e rimanere agricoltore, ma l'agricoltura è una ricchezza, non dobbiamo da tutti i punti di vista abbassarla, perché il latte, la guerra del latte, la guerra del terreno, la guerra...
Voglio togliergli la parola, però vada
No, grazie,
così diamo anche la possibilità agli
grazie.
altri.
Well, I think the point is clear, and how should I say? I'm not particularly optimistic when I look at the current situation of Europe, and not only Western, but including Eastern Europe, because the countries are facing first, as the speaker said, in case of Italy, but many others, they are facing zero or negative population growth rate. They are rich countries with large welfare states, with large systems of redistribution, and they are countries that historically have not been countries of immigration, but of emigration. Italy is obviously a very clear case where Italians were migrants to the New World, mostly obviously to the United States, but to Argentina, to Latin America. But they were not facing massive immigration into Italy. It's actually a new phenomenon. So I think Europe has trouble dealing with the phenomenon that it never had to face. Actually, if you take a longer perspective, Europe started exporting people, in some sense, from the 1492 and went on exporting people and conquering lands for 5 centuries. On the one hand, Europe needs, obviously, younger population and people who would contribute and people who would work and whose incomes would be used to pay people who are retired. On the other hand, these people come from countries in Africa or the Middle East or elsewhere, and there is this social or political issue of absorption or assimilation. So it is, I think, these are difficult issues. I didn't talk here about Italy in the book or in my presentation because I deal with global things, but it does have, it is an issue when I said before that the location component is so important that actually the migration pressure on Europe is a question, or is a secular question. It's not a question of tomorrow or, as I said, next summer or so on. So it is a big question. Last point, also globalization ideologically cannot ideologically very easily accept the fact that labor cannot move, whereas capital can move. These are two factors of production. Globalization means, in most broader sense, free movement of capital, labor, technology, goods, ideology, politics, everything. So we have the situation that seems everything else can move, but labor cannot move. And it's a illogical situation that is not really consistent with the idea of globalization. But it does enter and faces this political issue that the speaker was speaking, and then actually, which I believe is a real issue that's not cannot be dismissed.
Ok, abbiamo delle domande qua, io prenderei 2 domande, c'è il signore e la ragazza che voleva, così facciamo le ultime 2 domande. No, qua c'è il signore che è da un po' che aspetta, forse non riusciamo a fare tutti, mi dispiace, cerchiamo di prenderne 2 insieme. We take 2 questions.
Yeah, insieme, yeah.
So, chiedo a tutti di essere sintetici, i preamboli insomma li lasciamo, almeno che non siano proprio necessari.
Va bene.
Ok, and I'll be brief.
Sarò breve. premessa dura 15 secondi. Nell'economia, specialmente nell'economia classica, partendo dalla rivoluzione industriale in poi, una variabile non è stata considerata, che era quella ambientale. Quindi abbiamo fatto sempre i conti senza l'oste. Ora, al di là del discorso che è già stato fatto sul clima, sul quale non mi ripeto, ci sono altre due importanti situazioni relativamente all'ambiente, che sono i limiti delle risorse e gli inquinamenti che ne derivano. Allora, credo che il primo sia un elemento fondamentale per tutte le dinamiche che si scatenano per appropriarsi delle risorse che abbisognano sia nei paesi più poveri, ma anche nei paesi in crescita in qualche modo, dove, schematizzando, ai cinesi non basta più la ciotola di riso, ma vogliono anche un po' di companatico con il riso. E quindi paesi un aumento di quelli che sono i bisogni. Gli inquinamenti non sono soltanto dovuti a quelli del clima, ma sono gli inquinamenti dovuti all'utilizzo di sostanze estremamente degradanti e pericolose. Ora, io non lo so se la nuova politica della Cina, già ampiamente sperimentata in Africa, no? E che forse oggi con la via della seta si ripercuote anche in altre parti del mondo, in qualche modo, ma poi vale anche per tutte le nazioni, in qualche modo riuscirà a superare questo elemento fondamentale critico oggettivamente. Grazie.
C'è la ragazza con il maglione marrone e il ragazzo con la maglia gialla, poi lasciamo rispondere il professore e chiudiamo. Probabilmente ci saranno tante altre domande, magari ancora qualche minuto si ferma e vi darà qualche risposta anche a titolo individuale.
Grazie mille per la chiarezza con cui ha fatto la differenza fra il livello globale e i livelli nazionali, perché certe volte sono molto confusi quando si parla di diseguaglianze. A livello nazionale, quali sono, quindi in un contesto di diseguaglianza crescente, quali sono le politiche più efficaci per contrastare invece l'aumento della diseguaglianza a livello nazionale?
Raccogliamo anche questa?
I might go in English so it's easier to understand each other. So just one thing you said before with regards to Brexit, saying that one potential driver of Brexit might be the inflow of people from Eastern Europe into the UK. But actually, I remember seeing some research showing that actually those parts of Great Britain more in favor of Brexit actually seem to be the less exposed to the inflow of migrants, whereas, you know, places like London, of course, and we're more exposed to diversity, and migrants actually are notably way more in favor of the remain within the European Union. So actually my question is about alternative explanations, which we normally, when we talk about Brexit and Trump and the rise of populism, we tend to talk about, to fall back on an economic explanation, of course, and actually your talk, of course, is mainly concerned with economic issues. But there might be some other explanations, maybe not equally relevant, but relevant nonetheless. Maybe cultural, maybe, you know, the rise of racism, which is not necessarily related to economic issues. So I just was wondering, what's your take on this? Thank you.
Grazie mille, io lascerei il professore rispondere.
Okay, I'll be very, very short. On the first question, I will not go into all the issues of climate change, environment, and so on. But one thing that was mentioned that I think is important is the role of China in Africa. And I have to say, I'm a big proponent of that role in Africa. And I find absolutely incomprehensible and self-defeating attitude of Europe, which now questions that role in China, because if China is successful in helping developments in Africa, that would simply mean that actually Africans down the road will have less incentive to come to Europe. So actually China, in some sense, I see China globally as helping the European situation on the migration front. You know, obviously these are issues of 20, 40 years, but certainly Europe is better off with an Africa that is richer than an Africa which is permanently poor. That's why I find it really incomprehensible, the attitude of Europe towards China. The second question was about domestic policy. So that's, of course, a huge issue, and I didn't even have the time to move into the national inequalities. I will just say that in my book and in the forthcoming book, there are two types of policies that I advocate. I think that we need to change, first, entirely the objective. The objective so far was to have a capitalism which is fairly redistributive at the stage of when you come with taxation and transfers. I think that type of capitalism has reached the limit because people don't want to be taxed anymore than what they are now, and they don't believe in government's kind of efficiency of transfers. So an alternative position, I think, is to have a sort of as an objective, a capitalism with fairly equal, not exactly equal, but less unequal distribution of human capital, so-called skills, and financial capital. Because currently financial capital is extremely unequal, and of course skills are also unequal because you have people who are able to go to, private schools to make lots of money and so on, and others who don't have the access. So that then derives to two types of policies. One set of policies on education is much stronger public sector in education, much easier access to the public sector, and really reinforcements of the public sector so that actually education is really accessible to everybody. The second type of policies goes for what I call deconcentration of ownership of capital, which means tax advantages to the small investors, tax advantages to the middle class, reduction of tax advantages to the rich, equalization of taxation for capital and labor, particularly for the United States, where capital is taxed at the rate which is 1/2 of the rate of labor. So these will be the two types of policies that I advocate. It was obviously very brief, but I think that's enough for now. And finally on Brexit, of course, I don't want to go into the issue of Brexit. I don't think that there is anybody who is not tired of Brexit, including those people who are voting every day for a different solution and every day rejecting. It's like it's literally like Monty Python situation, really. So I will not go into discussion on that, but I believe that migration did play an important role. And the fact that you quote, that is right, that obviously London was for remaining, and of course parts of England where there are no foreigners are for exiting. But this is, I think, a false kind of a conclusion, because people who are living in small communities, they may be afraid of foreign influence or maybe immigration, because they're afraid that that immigration is going to change their way of life. Because if you have, if you have one cafe in your place, and that cafe suddenly is not a cafe where you can go, and it becomes sort of taken over by some other people, foreigners and others, that is going to change your life very dramatically. We see the same thing in France and possibly in Italy as well. So the fear is not necessarily related to the actual number of immigrants that you have in your community. London, obviously, is a totally different story. London has been, of course, an international city for 2 centuries, so it's a different story. But whether I'm right or not on that doesn't matter, because I think my essential point is that all these what so-called populist movements in Europe, I think, have to be understood really within economic, in my opinion, economic conditions. It's actually, I think, economic conditions and migration that then lead to the rise of dislike of foreigners, cleavages in the nation, and so on. I don't think that you have racism and xenophobia just spring up by itself. They spring up because people are economically not happy. And I don't like to go now into comparisons with the previous period, but we have had generally the case, the situations like that economic malaise leads to a political and social malaise.
Io farei un applauso al professore ringraziandolo per la disponibilità. Grazie ancora. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.